3 days no one claimed her at the station, until a little girl said, "That's her. Can you be my mama?" The Redstone Junction station sat under the noon sun like a relic abandoned by time. Boards warped with age creaked in the wind, dust stirred in lazy spirals across the platform, and the faint scent of smoke from some distant fire lingered in the heat-baked air. The town beyond the station lay silent, shutters drawn, windows half-shadowed, as if the whole place were holding its breath. On the splintered wooden bench, a little girl sat alone, her dress faded and caked with dried mud, shoes worn down to the soles. Her hair, tangled and dusty, clung to her forehead in thin strands, framing eyes too wide and searching for a child of her age. Eyes like twin mirrors reflecting the loneliness of a world that had passed her by for 3 long days. No one had claimed her. 3 sunsets had slipped across the horizon, painting the dust gold and crimson, and still she waited. Her small hands rested in her lap, fingers entwined as if holding on to the last thread of hope. A hawk drifted overhead, wings spread, silent against the burning sky, a sentinel circling in patience, watching the emptiness below. Somewhere, a tumbleweed scraped across the tracks, scattering grit across the boards with a soft, whispering hiss. The air tasted of dust and leather, dry and metallic, and carried with it the faint smell of the distant fire, a warning of the harshness beyond the station walls. Elias McCrae rode in from the east, a lone figure on horseback, spurs catching the sun with each deliberate step. The rhythm of hooves striking gravel echoed across the empty platform, carrying sparks like fleeting stars. His coat, sun-faded and stiff, shifted with the movement of the horse, and the brim of his hat cast a shadow over eyes hardened by years of solitude and loss. For a moment he saw nothing but the silhouette of a small child, trembling against the harsh light, a fragile figure clinging to the rough-hewn bench. The townsfolk, scattered here and there, avoided meeting her gaze. Their murmurs trailed like ghosts. She's cursed. Trouble follows her. No one claims what's already broken. Yet the girl lifted her chin, unflinching. There was defiance there, brittle and delicate as sun-bleached glass. She shifted slightly, exposing a dirt-streaked cheek, and in that instant, Elias felt the pull of something long buried, something tender, something he thought the desert had burned from him. The wind picked up, rattling the sign above the station with a hollow clatter, carrying grit into eyes and down sleeves. The little girl's lips parted, voice small but unwavering, a fragile thread across the dusty air. "Can you be my mama?" The words struck Elias like a sudden gust, sharp and unexpected. The stoicism he wore as armor faltered. He reined in his horse, sparks of stone from the hooves scattering across the wooden boards, and stared. The world around him seemed to still. The distant fire smoke hung frozen, the tumbleweed paused mid-roll, even the hawk above lingered in the sky like it too held its breath. There was no room for hesitation in that voice. It carved through the solitude he had wrapped himself in for years, slicing through the dust, the heat, the silence. For a long beat, neither moved. Elias's jaw tightened, fingers brushing against the worn leather of his saddle, eyes scanning the girl's small frame as if seeking a clue to the sorrow etched into her being. And in that glance, he saw the weight of unclaimed days, of nights alone beneath unkind stars. The wind shifted, stirring the dust at their feet, curling around the girl's legs like a protective veil, yet unable to shield her from the gaze of the man who now felt the gravity of her plea. A distant clock tower tolled, hollow and deep, carrying the sound across the empty junction. Somewhere a train whistle moaned far off, fading into the horizon. Elias exhaled slowly, the roughness of his breath mingling with the dry air. He did not speak. He could not yet. Words were brittle instruments compared to the weight of what he now carried, a responsibility unasked for, yet undeniable. The hawk wheeled higher, gliding on the warm currents, its shadow passing across the child's upturned face. She watched it with a strange serenity, unaware of the storm it mirrored. The sun dipped slightly, shadows stretching long across the platform, curling around boards and benches and the spaces between. In that elongated moment, something unspoken shifted. Elias knew, with a certainty that was terrifying in its clarity, that this meeting, the girl, the station, the silence, the hawk above, would unearth old sorrows, awaken dormant compassion, and set them both on a path that could not be undone. He dismounted slowly, the hooves clattering against the gravel, dust spiraling into the low light. The girl's eyes widened, anticipation flickering like a candle struggling against the wind. Elias took a step forward, then another. The sun caught the brim of his hat, glinting across hardened features softened by a sudden, hesitant warmth. And as the wind shifted once more, carrying the scent of fire and distant rain, the world held its breath, watching, waiting for the first bond forged in silence, dust, and courage. Elias McCrae guided his horse slowly along the cracked road that skirted Redstone Junction, each hoofful sending small clouds of dust twirling into the fading light. The girl clung to his arm, her fingers curled around his rough, calloused skin, tiny anchors against the vast, indifferent desert. The wind rose and fell like a restless spirit, carrying the scent of wild sage, sun-baked earth, and the faint metallic tang of gunpowder that lingered from duels long past. Elias's eyes flicked to the horizon, where the sun bled gold into the canyon walls, and for a moment he saw only ghosts, shadows of a life he thought he'd left behind. Memories came unbidden. Nights spent on the porch of his ranch, staring into the darkness, counting the stars as if they might offer absolution. The soft, haunting lullaby his wife once sang, lingering in the air like a fragrant ghost, threading through the empty rooms he could never fill. Her laughter, her light, now gone, leaving only the echoes of a heart too stubborn to mend. Betrayal carved into him like knife scars, the sting of a partner who vanished with promises and silver coins. He had learned to ride through life alone, to guard the hollow spaces, to measure hope in careful increments. And yet, here was this small, fragile being, the embodiment of need and innocence, tugging at the edges of his solitude. The girl's story unfolded in glimpses, like flickering shadows on a wall. A homestead engulfed in flames, smoke clawing at the sky, a mother taken too soon, her soft hands vanishing into memory. The long, desperate journey that had ended at the abandoned station. She was a bird with singed wings, fragile yet yearning to fly, her chest rising and falling with each tentative breath, eyes reflecting courage she had not been taught to trust. Elias felt a protective pulse he had not allowed himself in decades, a tether forming across the dusty air between them. As they passed the edges of town, murmurs began to stir. From shuttered windows and sagging porches, neighbors whispered, "Where'd she come from? She'll bring trouble." The blacksmith paused mid-swing, hammer raised, gaze darting toward the girl. The saloon doors creaked as patrons tilted heads, eyes sharp, silent questions sharp as knives. Even the sheriff, leaning against the sun-darkened post outside his office, let a measured glance travel their way. Every stare pressed against Elias's chest once. The wind lifted, teasing strands of her hair across her face, and he brushed them back with a tenderness he had not shown anyone in decades. A distant bell rang from the station, hollow and long, resonating across empty streets like a heartbeat. Somewhere a wagon creaked over cobblestones, wheels groaning under unseen weight. Elias's jaw tightened, the line of his shoulders stiffening as the murmurs of suspicion grew louder, carried on the wind. Who claims her? Trouble is coming. The words did not matter. Their threat was tangible, echoing off walls and fences and into his chest. Yet as darkness edged the town, the horizon burning with streaks of red and violet, Elias felt the stirrings of something fragile and undeniable, the beginning of trust. The girl leaned closer, a feather-light weight against his arm, and he allowed himself a rare, fleeting thought of what life might be if he answered her plea, if he let the past bleed into the present and stitched hope into the torn fabric of their lives. The wind howled again, this time carrying a chill that hinted at approaching danger. The scent of gunpowder from long-forgotten duels riding with it, as though the past itself was stirring in anticipation. Elias tightened his grip, not on the reins, but on the choice before him. the responsibility that would either save or shatter both of them. He glanced down at the girl, whose wide eyes reflected both fear and unwavering hope, and whispered softly, almost to himself, "We'll make it through. Together." Shadows lengthened. Dust swirled, and the town held its breath. In that quiet, uncertain evening, two lives, scarred and yearning, crossed paths, tethered by a fragile promise and the weight of history. The road ahead was long, winding, and littered with dangers yet unseen. But for the first time in decades, Elias allowed the flicker of something close to hope to warm his chest. Night fell over Elias McRae's ranch like a dark velvet curtain, heavy and suffocating, swallowing the horizon in an inky embrace. The moon hung low, pale and watchful, casting long skeletal shadows that stretched across the fences and corrals. The wind rattled the wooden gates with a dry, hollow clatter, as if drumming a warning against the encroaching silence. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote's cry pierced the stillness, sharp and lonely. The little girl huddled near the doorway of the cabin, knees tucked to her chest, eyes wide as the shadows seemed to gather purpose and patience. Then the quiet broke. Hooves struck the earth in measured rhythm, not from a lone rider, but a coordinated approach. Elias's hand went to his revolver, fingers brushing the worn leather grip, heart tightening. From the darkness emerged figures, 5 men, bounty hunters, their faces half hidden under brimmed hats, eyes cold and calculating as the steel of the guns they held. The leader stepped forward, tall and unyielding, gaze piercing like a blade. "We're looking for the girl," he said, voice low, deliberate, carrying weight in the desert night. "She belongs to the law, or her father, if you know what's good for you." Before Elias could respond, the first shots rang out. Gunfire shattered the silence, each report echoing against the barn walls and corrals. Dirt erupted under hooves and feet, a storm of grit scattering across the wind. The little girl screamed, the sound raw and sharp, slicing through the darkness like a fragile bell. She ducked behind a broken fence post, gripping it with small, trembling hands, peering through the gaps as sparks and smoke lit the night. Elias moved with deliberate fury, stepping into the chaos, revolver drawn. His eyes were storm clouds, lips pressed tight, jaw clenched. The fight was brutal, raw, hand-to-hand combat amidst the splintered wood and flying dust. Fists struck with bone-shattering impact. Rope burns seared skin where men tried to wrest control. Blood mixed with dirt, the metallic tang sharp against the senses, as Elias fought not just for survival, but for the fragile life huddled nearby. Every movement was a dance with danger, every breath measured against the howl of wind and the distant coyote's lament. The girl watched in silent awe, wide-eyed, her fear mingling with admiration. Elias, scarred from years of solitude and betrayal, moved with an instinct honed by hardship and grief, a protector reborn in the night. The leader lunged, gun swinging, but Elias sidestepped, sending him sprawling against the corral rail with a thunderous crash. Each sound, wood splintering, boots scuffing gravel, the sharp report of gunpowder, etched itself into memory. The wind carried every detail, rustling the sagebrush and rattling the cabin shutters, whispering danger with each gust. Through the fight, snippets of whispered dialogue slipped into the air. Elias muttered between gritted teeth, "You won't take her. Not while I breathe." The leader spat, voice dripping with contempt. "She's not yours. She's tied to blood you don't understand." The girl shivered but stayed hidden, absorbing the tension, sensing layers of history and secret pain in the man who fought so fiercely to shield her. She knew fragments of her own story, shadows of truth she had yet to voice. And in that moment, the bond between them deepened. Unspoken but undeniable, the skirmish raged, hands gripping splintered wood. The thud of fists, the crack of revolvers, the hiss of gunpowder filling the air. Elias's movements were precise yet furious, born of years spent surviving alone, each action protective, each decision a shield around the girl who clung to hope. The desert itself seemed alive, every gust of wind a harbinger, every flicker of shadow a lurking threat. Sand swirled in miniature tornadoes around them, carrying grit into eyes, mouths, and the folds of heavy coats. Finally, after a tense and bloody struggle, the hunters withdrew, backing into the dark, dragging bruised bodies and broken pride with them. The leader spat on the ground, eyes narrowed, promise lingering in the cold air. This isn't over. She'll be ours, sooner or later. And with that, they disappeared into the night, swallowed by the desert and the darkness beyond the horizon. The silence that followed was deep, almost sacred. The wind slowed, sighing through the gates and corrals, carrying away the dust and the acrid tang of gunfire. Elias dropped to one knee beside the girl, brushing her hair from her tear-streaked face. She clung to his hand, small and tentative, and he let her, feeling the weight of her trust settle across his chest like a warm, fragile shield. No words were necessary. The bond had been forged in fire, in fear, and in courage. For the first time in years, Elias allowed himself a flicker of something close to hope. The girl's eyes met his, wide and searching, reflecting the remnants of terror now edged with admiration. He whispered, voice low but steady, "We made it! For now." She nodded, pressing closer, small hands wrapped around his, anchoring herself to the only safety she had ever known. The moon hung like a sentinel above, silver light pooling over the scorched earth, the barn, and the battered corral. Dust swirled lazily in its glow, catching in the air like suspended stars, and the desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. In the quiet aftermath, the first real flickers of familial connection emerged. Elias's hand tightened around hers. A silent promise, a tether forged in blood, dust, and courage. The wind died down, leaving an eerie calm, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest, reminding you of what had been lost and what must still be protected. And in that moment, under the watchful eyes of moon and hawk, the bond between the scarred protector and the fragile survivor was sealed, not in words, but in the unshakable rhythm of heartbeats shared in the desert night. The cabin on Elias McCrae's ranch offered sanctuary from the night, a fragile bubble of warmth against the chill that crept across the desert floor. The fire in the hearth crackled and popped, casting shadows that danced across rough-hewn walls and worn furniture, painting the space in flickering hues of amber and oak. Same kind of quiet despair he had carried for decades, hidden behind a veneer of stoicism. A slow-burning tenderness began to seep into the room, subtle, unspoken. The way she leaned slightly closer, the way he shifted, adjusting a blanket over her knees. There was no overt declaration, only the quiet acknowledgement of shared wounds, and a fragile trust beginning to form between protector and child. Outside, the night pressed closer, and with it came reminders of danger. The wind rose in uneven gusts, rattling the cabin shutters and carrying distant half-heard threats. Coyotes yipping, the clatter of a wagon wheel on stone. Elias's hand rested near his revolver, though the tension in the cabin was not for him alone. It was for the girl, for her fragile sense of security. Each shadow that flickered across the walls was a subtle echo of the threat that lingered, a reminder that peace was temporary and vigilance necessary. The girl's voice trembled again, softer now, recounting moments of kindness she had known amid horror. A neighbor's hand offering bread before vanishing, a stranger's smile before turning away. Elias watched her closely, noting the resilience hidden beneath fear. The locket she held was not just jewelry. It was a symbol of survival, a tether to the mother she had loved and lost, and a glimmer of hope that somehow life could still offer warmth. Elias's responses were minimal, yet each one resonated with the gravity of unspoken understanding. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, the gesture gentle, careful, carrying the weight of reassurance. "It's okay," he murmured, voice low, measured. "You're home now. Nobody's going to hurt you here." His words, simple and deliberate, carried an intimacy neither had known before. The room seemed to contract around them, the firelight stretching shadows into larger-than-life forms, symbols of the past and the future intertwined. Minutes passed in stillness, punctuated only by the crackling fire and the occasional sigh of wind against the cabin walls. In this quiet, Elias and the girl established a rhythm of trust, her small movements, hesitant and deliberate, mirrored by his protective proximity. The slow cadence of their interactions carried weight, heavy with empathy, fostering a connection deeper than words could articulate. Yet, even as they found fleeting comfort, the desert beyond whispered its reminders. Rumors of bounty hunters still lingered on the wind, the distant yips of coyotes carrying threats unseen. Shadows flickered across the walls with the wind's capricious breath, and every creak of timber hinted at danger that might descend without warning. Suspense layered itself into the cabin's warmth. Safety was a fragile veneer over the reality that outside, the world remained relentless. Finally, the girl leaned against Elias's side, small hands gripping the locket, as if holding herself together. He rested a firm hand over hers, an unspoken promise of protection. The firelight flickered over their faces, revealing tentative relief and the first glimmers of familial connection. The quiet confession had not only unburdened the girl, but awakened a tenderness in Elias long dormant, a recognition that life could be lived again, that hearts could open without immediate fear of breaking. In the hush of the night, shadows dancing across the cabin walls, Elias and the girl sat together in fragile peace. Outside, the wind whispered of past and future dangers alike, carrying secrets across the plains. Yet inside, the firelight and their shared silence held a new truth. Trust could exist, even in the midst of fear, and hope could begin to bloom where despair had once reigned. The dawn broke over Redstone like molten gold spilling across a canvas of dust and brick. Elias McCrae guided his horse down the main street, the little girl clinging tightly to his side, fingers gripping leather reins and calloused arm alike. Each hoofball sent spirals of dust into the pale light, drifting in lazy clouds that shimmered like smoke in the quiet morning. The town stirred reluctantly, windows opening with careful peeks, shutters rattling, and murmurs slicing the silence. It's him. With the girl. Whispers carried across porches and alleyways, curiosity edged with fear, slicing through the tension like a blade. Elias's eyes scanned every building, every shadow. His jaw tightened, hands firm on the reins, muscles coiled with anticipation. He sensed the weight of the morning, the patience of the desert stretched thin across brick and wood. In the distance, mounted figures emerged, the bounty hunters, reinforced and relentless, their eyes cold, rifles gleaming. The wind carried their intent, like the hiss of rattlesnakes in the sage, each step deliberate, each breath a promise of confrontation. Time slowed. Dust drifted lazily around hooves. Elias could feel the pull of history in every worn board, every shuttered window. He adjusted the girl, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, and whispered, "Stay close. Keep low." Her eyes, wide but resolute, reflected trust and courage, tiny embers of hope glowing in the dawn. Then it began. Gunfire erupted, cracking like thunder, echoing across the town's narrow streets. Horses reared, hooves clattering against cobblestones, metal ringing as shutters and signs shivered under bullets. Sparks flew from striking stone and iron, brief flashes like fireflies dancing in smoke. Elias ducked behind a corral fence, revolvers drawn, moving with calculated precision yet raw urgency. Each shot carried the metallic tang of blood and gunpowder, a reminder of the fragile stakes in this battle. The girl crouched behind a broken post, eyes wide, but she did not freeze. She flung a bucket of water toward a hunter aiming at Elias, startling him just enough to give her protector an advantage. Elias's revolver barked, and a man fell, dust swirling as if the earth itself absorbed the violence. The wind whipped through the streets, carrying sand and grit into their faces, weaving chaos into a tapestry of survival. Elias's mind was a razor, honed on instinct and burdened with love for the small life he protected. Memories of past loss, the lullabies unsung, the betrayal that had hollowed him, fueled each motion. Yet amid the brutality, light emerged. Sparks from gunfire shimmered like fleeting fireflies, a dance of hope against the smoke-choked sky. Each ember mirrored the fragile promise of safety, a world he could protect, a life he could reclaim. The townsfolk watched from behind windows, breaths caught in throats, hearts pounding. Some offered quiet prayers, Others simply marveled at the lone man holding back chaos. The cacophony of destruction, the scream of horses, the clang of falling metal, the bark of revolvers, told a story more potent than words. Courage could bloom in the harshest of deserts. Finally, after a tense, breathless hour, the bounty hunters faltered. Their reinforcements scattered, horses bolted, and the leader's eyes, cold and calculating, met Elias's with reluctant respect before he retreated into the dust-choked horizon. The town was left battered, shutters splintered, gates scorched, the scent of gunpowder thick in the air. But among the debris a silence fell, heavy with awe and quiet admiration. The girl rushed to Elias, trembling, voice a whisper as fragile as morning fog. "Thank you." She clung to him, small hands wrapped around his arm, chest rising and falling in rapid bursts. Elias rested a steady hand atop hers, the warmth of contact a tether against the aftermath, his eyes scanning the town, ensuring no shadow remained to threaten them. The wind carried away the scent of fire and blood, leaving only dust and a tentative calm. For a moment, they simply stood there, silhouetted against the rising sun, two figures bound by trust and shared survival. Elias's gaze lingered on the girl's face, seeing not only fear, but resilience, courage, and the flicker of familial connection. Her locket caught the morning light, reflecting gold into the dusted streets, a symbol of hope and continuity amid destruction. Romantic tension lingered subtly beneath the bond forming between them, not love declared, but a slow recognition of shared vulnerability and unspoken understanding. Elias's scars, worn and hidden, softened in her presence. Her courage, small but radiant, ignited something in him he thought long buried. They had survived violence, yet the experience had sown threads of belonging and night before. Elias McCrae and the little girl stood side by side on the porch of his ranch, shoulders brushing, their breath misting in the crisp morning air. The wind stirred gently, carrying the scent of wildflowers and sun-warmed sage, a balm to the night's chaos. Somewhere above, a hawk cried, its wings slicing silently through the pale sky. In the distance, a train's whistle blew, carrying echoes of the station where their story had begun, a reminder of the journey that had brought them here. The town was awake but hushed, observers peeking from behind windows, doors, and porches. The whispers had shifted from suspicion to reverence. "That's Elias McCrae," some said softly, "the man who stood for her." Their acknowledgement was quiet, respectful, a recognition of bravery displayed without arrogance or show. Children dared to peek through gaps in fences, and elders nodded from porches, acknowledging the bond forged in fire, dust, and blood. Within the ranch, life began to settle into a fragile rhythm. The little girl knelt in the small garden, hands brushing soil over sprouting shoots, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Elias moved steadily along the wooden fences, hammer in hand, repairing splintered boards, the creak of wood under pressure mingling with birdsong and the distant hum of the train. Every movement was simple, mundane, yet laden with significance, acts of care, building, tending, shaping a world reclaimed from fear. The girl's locket rested against her chest, polished and repaired, glinting faintly in the sunlight. It was a talisman of survival and hope, a reminder of what had been lost and what had been found. The burned gates had been rebuilt, standing as silent sentinels of resilience, the scars of the past transformed into markers of endurance. Each detail spoke volumes, a visual testament to life continuing despite adversity. Elias and the girl shared moments that were quiet but charged with emotion. Hands brushed as she passed him a tool, their fingers lingering longer than necessity required. A glance, a small smile, the tilt of a head toward the other. They were simple gestures but weighty, carrying unspoken words of trust, reliance, and the beginnings of a familial bond. Romantic tension lingered subtly in the air, tempered by care and shared survival rather than desire, forming a connection both tender and profound. "You're home," Elias said finally, his voice low and deliberate, breaking the silence. The girl looked up at him, eyes bright, lips curving into a wordless smile that spoke volumes, acknowledgement, safety, belonging. She leaned slightly toward him, small hand brushing against his as she adjusted a plant in the garden, and he allowed the gesture, accepting it as the promise of trust solidified. The firelight from the hearth, long since extinguished, had been replaced by the gentle glow of morning, and yet warmth lingered in their shared presence. The wind stirred again, teasing dust into small swirling patterns, rustling the leaves of young trees planted along the fence. A hawk circled lazily overhead, a sentinel in the sky, mirroring the protection Elias had offered. Even the distant rumble of the departing train seemed part of the choreography, a punctuation mark on the journey completed. The chapter closed, the past acknowledged without letting it dictate the future. Elias paused, leaning on the fence post, observing the girl's small hands moving deftly in the soil. He remembered the terror, the nights of gunfire, the fear etched into her eyes the first time he had met her at the deserted station. And now, the same hands that had trembled in fear guided seedlings into the earth with care, hope, and intention. It was a quiet miracle born not of grand gestures but of steadfast protection and trust. The girl looked up, her gaze meeting his once more. And in that moment, all the trauma, all the battles, all the whispered fears of townsfolk melted into insignificance. The ranch, the rebuilt gates, the repaired locket, and the quiet morning light were proof that life could continue, that hope could root even in scorched soil. They remained side by side, the bond between them solid, a family forged in dust and fire, strengthened through danger and trust. Shadows retreated into corners as the sun climbed, bathing the world in gold, illuminating a home finally reclaimed. The wind softened, carrying away the remnants of past threats, leaving only peace, subtle and enduring. Elias's eyes swept over the ranch, the town beyond, the path they had traveled together. The scars remained visible, the burnt gates, splintered boards, the dust-streaked streets, but they no longer represented loss alone. They spoke of survival, courage, and redemption. The girl adjusted the locket at her chest, sunlight glinting off the metal, and Elias allowed himself a small, satisfied nod. Life continued, fragile yet unwavering. Dust settled, fires burned low in chimneys, and the wind whispered over the plains with a promise that the darkness had passed, at least for now. Hand in hand, Elias and the girl faced the new day, the horizon wide and forgiving, their silhouettes a testament to endurance, love, and the quiet power of hope reclaimed.